right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Dynamic Lifestyle Podcast. We have our amazing guest here, Dr. Antonio. He is the founder of the ISSN, International Society of Sports Nutrition. We've had the pleasure of meeting Dr. Antonio several times at the conferences, and he's just an overall amazing person. Dr. Antonio, how are you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing great. Hey, thank you so much for having me on the podcast. I think we'll have a lot of fun. This won't be your typical nerdy science
Absolutely.
stuff.
Alrighty, so we always like to kick off our podcast kind of with our guests and just always kind of find out who this person is and what their story is. So if you can kind of just elaborate and just tell me who Dr. Antonio is and what is your story.
Well, I guess if you want to go back, I mean, a lot of people don't realize I'm actually an immigrant. My mom and dad, they came from the Philippines to the United States when I was about 3 years old. And I think in large part that shaped who I am, particularly the influences from my dad and my mom. In a way you could call it the quintessential American success story. You come from another country, work your butt off, become successful, try to pass it down to your kids. And so, sort of fast forwarding quite a bit, I remember my dad saying, when I was in college, he's like, well, you're taking all these science courses. Why don't you just become a doctor, a medical doctor? Because that's what he was. He was a medical doctor. And I said, well, I learned at an early age going with you to the office that I don't like being around sick people. So that pretty much killed medicine right there. And so, I decided, hey, why not go into science? I didn't know anything about science as an undergrad. I mean, whoever does. And back then there was no exercise science. That's what's really odd. It's really a rather new field. And so I decided to go in exercise science, knowing full well that I was going to pursue a PhD because, as my dad would say, well, what are you going to do with a bachelor's degree? And I'd say, I don't know, be a bum. And he's like, well, you can't make money being a bum, so you might want to do something else. So I figured I'll pursue a PhD. And in a way, that's, people say, well, how much of this have you planned? And I said, the only thing I actually planned was getting the PhD. After that, I just sort of did whatever I felt like doing, to be honest. There was no grand plan. And I know this interview will sort of venture into things that I've done. And oddly enough, these were things that sort of came up and circumstances in a way dictated sort of what path I took. So fast forward to now, without taking up too much time, I mean, I live in South Florida with my wife. I have twin daughters who are in high school. And in fact, they're in Minnesota right now at a running camp. Wow. So they do a lot of, luckily they are embracing exercise the way my wife has been trying to get them to. And so, during the summer, I primarily do a lot of writing. In fact, I have a couple manuscripts that have been submitted and really, running the ISSN. That's in large part what I've been doing. And in my spare time, a lot of people realize living in South Florida, I'm pretty much at the ocean. In fact, I was in the ocean this morning. I paddle all the time and I compete in local races in the state of Florida. So in a nutshell, that's sort of who I am,
That's
science.
Awesome. Not too shabby of a life you're living.
No, what's funny is I always tell people, at least figure out what you don't like. And once you eliminate that, then you can figure out what you want to do. And way back when, I knew I wanted to live somewhere warm and somewhere near the beach. Yeah. How I got there, it was sort of this roundabout route, but I knew I didn't like cold. And I had to just figure out how to get there. And so I'm here and I'm not leaving Florida. I don't care how much money anyone offers me, unless it's Hawaii maybe. But but other than that, I love it here. It's like I feel like I'm on vacation all year.
That's awesome. I mean, we're huge fans of Florida, and there's always room over here in California.
But it's expensive where you guys are.
I know. It is. It is.
Just eating, the taxes. I'm like, wow, you guys really spend a lot of money just on regular stuff. So
yeah, I know. Like we were talking about earlier, Eric has to go on the weekend to do some dancing over in Vegas to pay the bills.
Hey, but you know what? It's all cash. You don't even have to report it.
Exactly, right?
All right. So, speaking of the ISSN, so we want to know how, where, and when did this grand idea develop?
That's a good question. I think if you go back to the late 90s, early 2000s, there was a conference that, and you guys know him, Doug Kalman, one of my friends. Right. He lives in South Florida. He actually organized the sports nutrition conference for SCAN. SCAN is the subgroup of formerly the American Dietetic Association. Now it's the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. They changed their name. Obviously, it's a rebranding issue. But anyways, he actually organized the sports nutrition part of SCAN. And what's interesting is at the time, there really were very few people doing anything in sports nutrition. It was like the same 6 people. And at the dinner, it was sponsored by Metrics. I actually worked for Metrics at the time. I remember Susan Kleiner. She's up in Seattle. She's a PhD RD. She had mentioned, she's like, why don't we do this ourselves? Why don't we create our own organization that focuses on sports nutrition? And, at the time, I'm like, wow, that's a great idea, but that's a lot of work. And it's not, you wouldn't get paid for it because most of this kind of stuff is sort of sweat equity. You do it because you love it. But we decided to sort of pursue it. We met at the American College of Sports Medicine that same year, and it was myself, Doug Kalman, Rick Kreider, who's now at Texas A&M, Anthony Almada, who was the original founder of PAS, and Susan Kleiner. And we had dinner. The story is we had dinner at a sushi place, which we did because I always have dinner at sushi places. And we decided, why don't we do this? We'll start an academic nonprofit just like ACSM or NSCA. At the time, we actually didn't agree on a name. We were throwing out International this, American this, and, American Society of Sports Nutrition sounded good at the time, but the initials are ASSN, and it just looked weird. ASSN. So we settled on ISSN, and I remember our first conference was in 2003, and literally Doug Kalman and I were just emailing. Wait, was there email back then? I think there was email. We were emailing, calling people, saying, hey, just show up. And in fact, half the people who showed up were speakers. So it was like, just show up. It's sort of like Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come. And there was maybe 50 to 60 people who showed up for our first conference. It was in Henderson, Nevada. Small group, but an enthusiastic group. And it just sort of was a slow trickle. And the way ISSN has basically grown is from students. These faculty, eventually they graduate students, they get their PhDs, they have their students, they graduate their students, and the only way, or the primary way that these academic nonprofits grow is you just get more students coming to the conference. So in sort of the short story is there was a market opportunity. We were tired of how ACSM and other organizations treated sports nutrition because we thought there's legitimate science here, but no one seems to see it. And so we thought, let's just do it ourselves. I mean, it's not like there's many people doing sports nutrition research. And now you fast forward, what is our 13th annual conference? Now there's people who they go specifically into sports nutrition, and that's why they get their doctorates or masters or whatever. So it's amazing how things have changed because back then, if you told, well, actually, let's even go back further. When I was doing my PhD in the 1990s, if you had told someone that you wanted to do a doctoral dissertation on sports nutrition, you would have been laughed at. They're like, what's sports nutrition? We need to study protein? Protein doesn't do anything. I mean, it was that bad. People are like, you're wasting your time. Don't even think about it. So there's no sports nutrition. That's why I got my PhD in muscle physiology. I studied muscle hypertrophy. But in the back of my mind, I knew I was going to get back into it eventually. I didn't know how. And it's kind of weird how it worked out that I got back into it through ISSN.
Gotcha. That's awesome. That's an amazing story.
It is. Yeah. And you guys have come so far. That's the thing.
Guys,
it's just, it's amazing. I mean, you guys are doing a really great job with that organization.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. It's it's a lot of fun. And here's what's interesting. I mean, you've been to ISSN so frequently that, and I don't know if you go to other conferences like American College of Sports Medicine or Experimental Biology, but the common thread that people seem to say about ISSN, and maybe it's the kind of people it attracts, is that everyone is happy and fit. You don't see grumpy people at our conference. Right. It's really kind of interesting. It's like, and you go to other conferences, there's a lot of unhappy people. It's like, why are you guys here? It's boring and you're unhappy. I mean, find something you like to do. But at ISSN, everyone's really happy. It's kind of, I mean, you might take it for granted, but I don't, because I've been to other meetings. It's like, wow, I don't want to go to this meeting ever again.
Yeah, it's a really good community.
Yeah, I think we've noticed that too. When we went to some of the ISSN conferences, everyone's very down to earth, very humble, and sometimes you go to conferences and some people are kind of like in their own little bubble. So, that's kind of we never got that vibe though there. So it's good.
Yeah, good. Yeah, okay. And guys like you, show up. It helps the ISSN brand because, everyone wants to help everyone else. And it's just, the camaraderie is just awesome.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. So let's shift gears here. So what made you want to become a professor and teach exercise science?
Well, let me answer the professor part because it's kind of a funny story. I remember I don't know if it was a freshman or sophomore, I was taking a psychology class, and the professor would show up in a T-shirt, which sometimes had holes in it, which I thought was funny, wearing painter pants, because apparently he would paint on the side to make money, and his hair would never be combed. And I'm thinking, wow, he gets up, he doesn't even comb his hair. I wonder if he even brushes his teeth, and he gets paid to do it just by talking in front of a bunch of students. And I'm like, that's a really cool job. I think I want to do that. And I love the hours. I mean, these professors, put it this way, if a professor ever complains about not making money, they're just not very bright, because there's money to be made. It may not be made at the university, but you can consult or whatnot. But anyways, I love the hours, and I'm like, wow, what a great job. And a lot of them would describe, their research is like, I'm getting paid to answer questions really for fun. I mean, that's what we do. It's not like, we're going to cure cancer, particularly in the exercise science, but you're doing things for fun. So I will always love the freedom of academics, that you could sort of do other things. And it actually allows me to do stuff with ISSN. I have that kind of freedom. So going from being a professor to studying exercise science, I always admired, I remember, and you guys are too young to remember this because you weren't alive, but in the 72 and 76 Olympics, you're like, wow, 72, 76, that's like ancient history. 72 Olympics, it was the first American to win the marathon. His name was Frank Shorter. 76 Olympics, you might even remember him or her, Bruce Jenner, won the decathlon. I'm like, wow, these guys are amazing. How do they do this? And in the back of my mind, it was sort of like, I know I can't do this stuff, but I want to understand how other people can do this stuff, can compete at the high level, whether it's running really fast or lifting heavy weights. To me, that was always really interesting. And on the flip side, it involves exercise, and I always liked working out. My uncle was my first martial arts instructor. He taught me Shotokan karate. And I was really hooked at a young age, in terms of liking the process of exercise. And that sounds odd, because I know a lot of athletes who actually but they dislike training. And I've always told them that you have to like the process if you want to be really great at something. Yeah. Maybe you could get by on natural talent, but there's a point where those guys and girls have natural talent, but also love the process of training. They're the ones who are going to be world beaters.
Exactly.
But I just like the process. And I'll never be world-class anything in exercise, but I just like the process. So I was always fascinated by it. And I knew once I was an undergrad and I got my biology degree, that I would venture into studying exercise science in whatever form, whether it was muscle stuff, sports nutrition, or whatnot. So, and you know what? It's something that, again, that was the only thing I planned. I planned to get that PhD and somehow get into this field. And it hasn't let me down. It's a fun field.
Yeah, that's great. Gotcha. So I'm going to throw a curveball at you. So let's say we travel back about 20 years, and let's say your profession does not exist. It's just completely erased. This profession wouldn't even be created. What do you see yourself doing right now today besides your profession?
That's a tough question, because in a sense, the profession barely existed back then. It was sort of hanging on a thread. It was in embryonic stages. I would have probably gone into another science field, and I think the areas that fascinated me most, oddly enough, was physics. I actually enjoyed physics as an undergrad. I remember the labs where I think my physics lab instructor was a baseball fan, and he would be like, well, what if you have a bat that weighs X amount of weight, X amount of kilos, and you swing it at this velocity, and it impacts a baseball which weighs this much, and you hit it at this angle, how far will it go? And I'm like, wow, that's kind of cool, And he would explain, how a baseball rotates, like if you hold it like this or hold it like this. I'm like, wow, that's still that's kind of cool. Sort of the physics of movement. I thought that would be interesting. And the other thing, because my father was a physician, would be to look at medicine, even though it would have to be an aspect of medicine that didn't deal with working with sick people, which sounds really weird. But my dad's like, you could be a pathologist and just stare at slides all day. I'm like, yeah, I guess I could do that. I'm not sure I want to stare at slides all day, but I could be a pathologist or something. Yeah. So it would probably be something in physics or something in medicine.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. So we'll stick on the 20 years going back topic. So if you could do that, what are 3 lessons that you've learned that you could tell yourself now?
Well, I think I didn't do this as much as I probably should have, but I think it's critically important. You guys are really good at doing this. It's reaching out to people in the field to not only learn things, but when you make these connections, it's sort of like the Kevin Bacon 7 degrees of whatever, where there's somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody. And maybe it's the advent of the internet and social media, which allows you to sort of reach out. But getting that network of people that you can count on for information, I think, is critically important. And I didn't do that enough as an undergrad or even grad student. It wasn't until I graduated that I started doing that. So I think that's critically important. And also the other thing is, I think it's important for people to get experience in the field. And I actually worked as a personal trainer while I was in grad school, and I'll be honest, I wasn't very good at it because there was parts of it that I don't think you could learn it in school. Mm-hmm. And, some people have a knack for it, others just don't. And I was very average at it. I'm much better at coaching teams versus working one-on-one for whatever reason. So I think getting that personal experience, I think, is critically important. You can't just rely on science and lab stuff and things like that, because in our field, a lot of it is, let's face it, a lot of it is based on experience, because there will never be a study on everything that we do.
Right. No, that's good, because that brings me to this idea that Eric and I had when we first started our business, was just have that kind of relentless mindset of just going out there and just reaching out to people, and we tell these people these days when they email us, so they'll ask us, what did you guys do to get from here to here, any recommendations? And that's one of the biggest things we tell them is, don't be afraid to go out there and network, just reach out. The only thing they can say is no, so having that type of mindset.
Or not respond. No. Or not respond.
Yeah.
Well, no, it's interesting you say that, because people are afraid to reach out because of the no.
Rejection.
But I'm like, it's just a no. I mean, okay, they say no. Who cares? But you guys have been really good at that, and a lot of people don't realize that it's a process. It doesn't happen immediately.
Yep.
You do a little bit each year and each time, and I think the combination of reaching out both via social media and internet and email, and also face-to-face, is important. If you don't do the face-to-face stuff, it's kind of hard, because I don't know about you guys, but I get a lot of emails, and oftentimes from people I've never met, and I have a hard time, it's like, how much can I help you versus someone who I've met face-to-face? It's just easier when I know people face-to-face, and I tell my students that all the time. I'm like, no matter how many emails you send to someone, if they've never met you, they will likely favor the person they've met for whatever reason, because it's just human nature.
Yeah, exactly. And then you'll have those people, well, they'll make an excuse about, oh, well, I can't afford to, get on a plane and go all the way to Florida. Well, it's like, hey, there's other people that are going to be hungrier out there. They're going to hop on that plane and find a way to do that and meet people, shake their hands, and, they're going to remember their faces. So it comes down to that.
I need you guys to talk to my classes. And it's funny, that's the exact same thing I would tell them. It's like, okay, you won't do it, but you know what? Someone else will do it.
Absolutely.
And they're the ones who are going to, get the job, get the internship, whatever it is, because they happen to make the extra effort. And I don't know if students now have, and maybe you guys are better in answering this, I don't know if social media has made students lazier, because they're like, well, maybe I'll just email them and reach them on Facebook, versus, well, that helps, but you got to meet them too. You got to do everything.
No, absolutely. That makes 100% sense, because I was listening to this podcast, and they were saying that now with social media and the accessibility that you have, people just have that accessibility to press a button and try to reach out to somebody via social media. And it's kind of like you just forget about, the old basics that you go back to, of just like building a relationship, shaking hands, and having a conversation, really.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people these days just feel like they're entitled, when they're really not, and I just don't know where that comes from, to be honest.
Yeah, no, those are good points. I feel exactly the same, and I think, just get out there. And you know what? And you may not be able to do it every year or every other year, maybe do it every 3 years or something. But God, the face-to-face and networking, and I tell students all the time, it's absolutely critical. School's important, but meeting people is just as important.
Yeah, it sure is. Powerful. Yeah. All right, so we're going to kind of just shift gears here. So where do you have systems, or the majority of your structure in your day, that you rely on? Or we can say in your life too.
I saw that question, and I'm thinking, I'm not really sure. Give me something more specific, because I think you'd be surprised how not systematic I am. Okay. But anyway.
Yeah, so like an example, like for myself, just the person that I am, like I rely on pretty much like a to-do list. Like I got to write my to-do list out the night before. I got to make sure I have maybe like 3 to 5 bullet points, like big ticket items that I need to knock out that day. No ifs or buts about it.
All right. here's the interesting thing, and a lot of my close friends and my wife says this all the time. She's like, how do you get work done? Because I'm either hyper focused or completely unfocused. And she would say, well, you're unfocused like 99% of the time. And I'm like, yeah, maybe I am unfocused, but that 1%, I'm a killer. So typically what I do is, and the one thing I can't do is I can't multitask. So for instance, in the month of July, I had well, you could say it's 2 goals. It's really 1 goal. There were 2 papers I needed to write. And one was on, we did a case in a morning versus evening study. And then I had to write a paper on, it was summarizing the 1-year high protein diet study and looking at blood markers and all that. So basically I wrote it down on a piece of paper, finished these 2 papers, and I can only work on things one at a time. So the first thing I do in the morning, I get up about 5 o'clock, is for the first 2 hours of the day, I can do anything. I mean, I'm writing really fast and whatnot, and I get my best work done between 5 a.m. and about 8 a.m.
Nice.
And I cranked out the first paper in about 4 days, and I'm working on the second paper, which is done. I just got to proofread it. So once I put my mind to it, I've literally gotten these papers done within a week, which sounds really odd because most people don't realize how fast I write. But when I sit down and write, I can write. And so once I'm done that, I sort of, I basically purge my mind, I clear it, and I'm like, okay, I sit around for a couple of days. I don't do anything. I paddle a lot. I go outside. I play with the dogs. Okay, then I get to figure out, okay, what's my next task? So it's sort of like, I liken it to, it's not a shotgun where you pull the trigger and you hit a lot of targets. It's, in a sense, I'm more of a sniper. I got to find one target, focus on it, stick to it, and finish it. Yeah, because some people are good at doing multiple things. I'm like, man, I just can't do that. I can't do that.
When the word successful comes to your mind, who's the first person that, just you think about?
That's a good question, because to me there are multiple ways to measure success, and I think people who are constantly learning and trying to make themselves better, I think is a sign of success. Sort of the antithesis of that, of what it would not be successful, I guess that's one way of answering it, are people who complain a lot. Yeah. I'm not a fan of people who complain a lot and whine a lot about I can't do this, I can't do that. It's like, how about figure out what you can do? And I guess sort of hand in hand with what constitutes success, I like to mention my mom and dad coming from another country and becoming successful here, and sort of preaching the idea that if you may not be the smartest one there, or maybe you are, who knows, but let's pretend you're not, because you never know. But you can always outwork other people.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, and it's same with athletics. You may not be the most talented, but at least you could outwork them. And if they beat you, at least it's not because you were lazy. You worked your butt off, did as much as you can, and they still beat you fair and square. Same with anything in terms of your profession, your work. Outwork them, or out clever them. You may figure out ways to be more creative than the person next to you. And to me, having those kinds of attitudes, contributes to success.
Nice. Love it. So with that said, I mean, what kind of, weaknesses or flaws do you have that you would say have turned into strengths in some capacity?
Well, clearly one of my weaknesses is that I tend to be unfocused. And so, like, for instance, I can't imagine going to a job where you're there, and I did this for 2 years, by the way, where you're there at 9 and you clock out at 5. This is when I worked. This is for 2 years. I worked for Metrics. Metrics was down in Boca Raton, Florida. And that's why I moved to Florida, by the way, to work for Metrics. And it was a corporate job, 9 to 5. And one of my friends was working there as well, Jeff Stout. He's now at the University of Central Florida. Okay. And literally, we could get our work done between 9 and 11. And then we'd sit around and just bullshit. It's like, God, what are we going to do? And if any of our former bosses heard this, they're going to be like, oh, my God, no wonder those guys had nothing to do. Yeah, because we did the work in 2 hours. And I'm thinking, the 9 to 5, in my mind, I'm like, there's no way I could do this, but I'll do it for a couple of years. Here's why. The networking and contacts we made while we were there are still valuable today. These are people I reach out to all the time. They reach out to me. So
it's awesome.
There was a reason for it, but I won't ever do it again. But I learned that I can't just set a block of time, 8 hours during the day, and just say, okay, work. I don't know if you guys do this, but I'll work, like, my best hours are 5 to 8. Then I'll go work out. I'll hang out on the beach, and then maybe I'll work a little from 1 to 2 or 1 to 1:15, and then I'll work a little bit at night. So I do sort of these punctuated chunks where I can be focused, because I can't, and I don't know how people do this. They can work like 8 hours a day and actually be productive, and maybe they're not being productive.
I don't think they are productive.
They're just pretending.
Yeah, seriously.
Looking busy is not the same as being productive.
Yeah.
And I think people just love to look busy.
Yeah, I just think too, like, attention spans are at an all-time, like, just, low. I mean, we could admit it as well. Our attention spans is just, it's tough. There's so much distractions, but I mean, we figured out the best tool for us is just, get that one big thing done in the morning, but just kind of, block the phone off. Just turn all the notifications off, all social media. Just be focused on that thing that you need to get done in that task. So,
but not only that too, I mean, like they say these days, the new cancer is sitting. I mean, it is horrible. Sitting like more than like an hour or two. Just, it is seriously horrible. I mean, it really, honestly, like negatively like affects our training. Like as far as like any type of lower body movement and stuff, our hips are so tight. So, yeah.
I mean, but you guys don't sit all day. I don't sit all day, and that's the beauty of it. It's there are people who do that, and it's like, how do you do that? That to me, that's just mind-boggling. Wow, you're sitting like 8 hours a day. That's just crazy. It's just crazy.
Yeah.
But I guess someone has to do it, right?
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so let's say somebody gave you a billboard, and this entire world could see the whole billboard. What would you want that billboard to say?
It would say two things: stop whining, and you're not a victim.
Hey, I like it. I like it.
And part of it is I'm around college students all the time, and I tell my kids this all the time. When you get to college, these are things professors don't ever want to hear. They don't want to hear you complain and whine that you can't do this, you can't do that, you don't have time. Don't ever say you don't have time, because you always have time. And college students are notorious for saying, "Oh my God, I'm so busy, I don't have time." I'm like, you have no idea what it's like to be busy. You think you're busy, but you're really not. And so don't complain, don't whine, you're not a victim. The beauty of this country is that if you work your butt off, you can become whatever you want to be, obviously with limits. I mean, if you're 5'4", you're not going to play for the NBA.
Yeah, right.
But maybe you could start your own business or something, or maybe you could start a business where you train NBA players. I mean, there are ways to get into things that you like. And I think once you remove the status of being a victim, then I think it opens up everything for you. But when people start playing I don't have money, I don't have time, I can't do this, it's like, well, you know what? Someone else will have it, and they're going to beat you to it. So that's what my billboard would say.
Awesome.
Love it.
Yeah, straight to the point. Love it.
All right. So we're going to move into what we call rapid dynamic questions. Okay. So the first one is,
boy.
We're very...
Wait. I got to be hyper-focused for this.
So Eric and I are huge on self-development. So I don't know if you're huge on that, but what are you doing currently right now, self-development wise?
Well, actually what I do in large part in terms of self-development are doing things or doing readings that are actually outside of my normal science stuff.
Nice.
And I need that sort of as a break. And what's odd is I'm actually a big fan. I read actually a lot more novels and fiction than I do science. And people find that odd, but I don't know if you guys are familiar with authors, but I read stuff by Vince Lynn, Lee Child. He in fact, the movie Tom Cruise is in, Reacher. Oh, yeah. It's based on a character called Jack Reacher. Yeah, it was a good movie. It was a good movie. I love reading these novels that have to do with sort of the good guy versus the bad guy, and of course the good guy always wins. And it's simple stuff. It's like you have a main character, then you have some bad actors, and the main character who's a good guy, somehow wins, beats up all the bad guys, and I like that kind of escape, because I find that if all I do is just read science, I don't know why, but it starts to bore me, honestly. Yeah, Holy smokes, how much of this I take? You don't want to make your profession the only thing that defines you. So, in terms of my self-development, I try to do things sort of outside of the scope of that. And one of the other things, which is fairly new to me, is, I do a lot of stand-up paddling races in Florida, and I've only been stand-up paddling for a year and about 3 months. And it's been a fun ride, because I've met a lot of new people in that community. It's a fun community, and I think outside of Florida, Southern Cal, Hawaii have some of the biggest communities of stand-up paddling. And so, I always say you will always find happy people on the beach. and that's where I spend a lot of time. You don't find unhappy people on the beach. Everyone's happy. So that's where I like to be.
Great. Awesome. Okay, next question. If you were able to have dinner with one person, and this person could be alive or dead, who would that person be?
When I was a kid, I was a huge fan of Bruce Lee. And,
awesome.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, they look at him as a martial artist, whereas if you read the stuff he wrote, I actually looked at him as just a generally smart guy who had ideas that he applied to fighting.
Yeah.
And the way he viewed, martial arts sort of as an analogy for life, I think was really interesting. And he was, a lot of people don't realize he got his college degree in philosophy of all things. So he would be someone that would be just absolutely fascinating to have dinner with.
Nice.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
All right. So we know that you like to paddleboard. So what else does Jose like to do outside for fun?
Well, you know what? I'm easy to please. You give me the beach, you give me the ocean, give me the board, I'm happy. And I love to go out. I mean, my wife and I and my kids sometimes, but love to go out to dinner. I love to eat sushi. I mean, restaurants. I love restaurants and things like that. Used to be a movie buff for a while, but I can't get my kids to go because they find the movies I like quite boring. And I tend to be really. I'm not a party person by any means. I would almost describe myself as an extroverted introvert. Meaning I'd rather be around a few people, like if you go out to dinner with a few people, than be in a large party with hundreds of people.
Yeah.
And you know what? And sometimes I just want to stay home and read a book. I read a non-science book. I mean, I probably spend a lot more time reading, outside of exercise. I spend a lot of time just reading, fiction.
Nice.
Gotcha. That's interesting stuff. So our last question. What is your definition of living a dynamic lifestyle?
I think to live a dynamic lifestyle, one is you got to take care of yourself first. And, it sounds like a selfish thing, but I think if you take care of yourself first, it's easier to help and take care of other people. So take care of yourself first. Always be open to new ideas because particularly both professionally and personally, but things change very quickly. And if you're open to new ideas, I think it's critically important. And also, it never helps to be adversarial or mean to other people. My idea is I'm nice to everyone until they screw me over, which, it happens rarely, but there's always, I give everyone the benefit of the doubt. To me, everyone is a potential friend, not a potential adversary. So, whereas other people view people as, they're the competitor, blah, blah, blah. Well, you know what? Life's too short. When you're on your deathbed, I don't think you're going to worry about who your competitors are.
Right.
You're going to worry. You're probably going to think more about how did I make someone else's life maybe a little bit easier. And I think that's important.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's awesome. And Chris and I are huge proponents on what we call the 4 pillars of life, which are health, wealth, love, and happiness. And so many people, they want to reach success and have all these materials and everything. But I mean, at the end of the day, if your health is not there, then how do you enjoy that wealth, love, and happiness?
Right. And with the love and happiness, that's basically you have your family and you have your friends, and that's it. I mean, you have family and friends, and they're the ones who sort of keep you grounded.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Again, that's people got to spend time with that. It's all of that's critically important.
Gotcha. Exactly. All right. So before we have you tell our listeners where they can follow you and your work, I just personally want to acknowledge you. I know this is coming from Eric too, since we're twins, so he'll probably think the same exact thing, right? But I want to say just thank you so much for everything you've done for us personally. I remember that first day I sent you that email like 5 years ago asking you about the ISSN, and then I made that decision to study for the CISSN. Then we both flew out to Florida, met you there, took the test, passed it, and then it's just been up from there. So I just want to say thank you so much for everything you've done, what you're currently doing right now for the fitness industry and everything with the ISSN.
Everything he said, I agree with.
Hey, well, no, thank you guys. I mean, it's guys like you that help put a good face to ISSN, but also a good face just to the industry in general. You want happy, positive people to interact with and network with. You don't want, and you guys probably see this as well. You see people, particularly on social media, who are always very adversarial. It's like everything becomes an argument, and And I'm like, wow, that must require a lot of effort. It's like you constantly argue. And I don't know how, why some people are like that, but you guys are super positive, and that's a great thing. And I wish more people were like that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So if you can tell our listeners where to follow you and your work.
Yeah, okay. I think for the ISSN, if you're interested in coming to our conferences, go to ISSN.net. Also, you can follow me on Twitter. Jose Antonio PhD is my handle. That's Jose Antonio PhD. And, of course, I'm easy to find on Facebook. We have an ISSN group page where we have usually good discussions. Sometimes they get kind of crazy. But the discussions tend to be good, as it relates to sports and nutrition. And also, if people email me, I respond to every email. It may not be that day, but eventually I respond.
That's really cool.
So if you need to reach me, or if any of your fans need to reach me, please do. And any way to help people get into the sports nutrition field or fitness field, I'll be happy to help them.
That's awesome.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Dr. Antonio, for your time, all your good stuff that you discussed on this episode. We really appreciate it.
And Dr. Antonio promised us off the mic that he's going to have an ISSN conference in Los Angeles soon.
Hey, but at least Phoenix is a little closer.
Right. We'll start there.
And Vegas, since you dance there and make money.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm going to make sure all the girls know.
I think that's what Chris secretly wants to do, but we'll leave it at that.
Hey, don't tell anybody.
All right, gentlemen. You have a great day.
All right, Doc. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.